President Lee and Rotarians and their guests. This is a pretty tough assignment because I was in Rotary for 25 years and was past president and secretary to the then governor, so I know how these things go. And when I was asked to speak, I thought I felt a wee bit like Elizabeth Taylor's eighth husband on their wedding night. In that the feeling was, I know what to do here, but how can I make it interesting? So I thought to make it interesting, what I'd do is start with a quote from Albert Einstein, and this is partially the theme that I would like to develop. Einstein said that scientists investigate that which already is, and engineers create that which has never been. So I'd like to continue that theme a little, but there's another interweaving theme that I would like to share with you, and that's the Rotary Foundation and what happened to me many summers ago. This was, at that time, there was the Rotary Foundation had a group study exchange award, and I'm not sure what it's called now. What is it called now? Is there an equivalent where young people are given the chance to travel offshore? What is it called? Same thing. So this was in 1970, and at that time, amazingly enough, it was for males only. Things have changed a wee bit, Kerry, which is very, very fortunate. But the reason I mention this is that quite often in Rotary, you don't get to have a longitudinal evaluation of what happened to those people who took part in a team like Group Study Exchange. So I thought I would tell you a little about that, and that kind of weaves in with the theme I'd like to develop. So this was 1970, and a newspaper advertisement appeared looking for candidates for a group study exchange team to go to the USA. So I grew up in Petone, was educated in Petone. Nothing like this had ever happened to my family to be going offshore. But anyway, I applied and was fortunate enough to get one of these group study awards and go to the USA. At that time, I was working for the government. I'd had a postgraduate award to go back to study at Canterbury. My then boss in the government said, no, we want you to work. About a year after that, I had an award to go to the Imperial College in London, and the same fellow said, no, you have to work, and I got sent to the Cook Islands after that. And over a Christmas and New Year period, so that was pretty tough. However, at the time of the Group Study Exchange Award, my student loan had come down, my salary had gone up, and I was very, very pleased to be able to go in and resign and go off to California. And in particular, at that time, one of the host families was a flight director at the Apollo Mission Control Center. He lived in California and more or less commuted when there was a manned satellite going up. So he said to me, would you like to spend a couple of weeks with me on the flight floor, the controller's floor at Houston? So it took about a nanosecond to say, yes, I would do that. So here's, I was going to say young, I think it's young, age 25, sitting in the Apollo Mission Control Center. And this was the time of Apollo 13. And so here were a lot of young people, male and female, not too much older than me, trying to get Apollo 13 back. And it really struck me that here was an application of science and technology, and these were people with the same qualification as myself. So that set off really a life-changing experience. And I want to be sure that I acknowledge the Rotary Foundation, and particularly the Rotary clubs of what was called 940 at that time. I think it's now called 9940, isn't it? So that was the district that sent us off to the US. So at that time, that was a life-changing experience. So I had a girlfriend back here who was keen on getting engaged. But when I came back, my then employer, the government, passed into history, and unfortunately so did she. So I want to then expand on that, because that's what set off a whole new thought process and certainly a new career. So as Tony would know, he was a contemporary at IBM, and so I spent about 4 or 5 years at IBM, and then decided to set up my own company, which then grew to a listing on the NASDAQ, and I retired in late 1990s, retired for 3 weeks, and then decided to set up an investment company, which I've been running ever since. And I'm trying to keep in balance, and I'll come back to this, of roughly a third of business, a third recreation, and a third of what I'd call good works. And being Chancellor at Victoria University is in the category, it's not recreation, it's in the category certainly of good works. So in returning to that life-changing experience through the Rotary Foundation, I want to talk about education and employment, and through 2 themes. The government recently set up, as part of their economic growth agenda, a program whereby they could look at future employment needs, and then how on earth are we going to develop young people to fill the positions, particularly around science, technology, engineering and mathematics. How can we encourage young people to take up those positions without it being thought all too hard? So the committee is working very assiduously at looking at how we can get another over 500 graduates per year. That's what it's going to take to support the country economically. There are many OECD reports which show we might even need more than 500 technical graduates a year, but 500 is not bad. So what has come out of this is pretty interesting. If you think of an output of 500 plus graduates per year in the so-called STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, then you have a look at the failure rate at university. So to get 500 out, you need about 600 going in. Then you think about the number of young people who don't want to take those subjects anyway, but might have been studying calculus, physics, mathematics, and done well at secondary school. If you work backwards, you need something like about 3,500 youngsters going into secondary school, interested in those technical subjects, in order to get 500 out. If you go back further and think of young people at primary school, particularly the later years, who are interested in science, the world around them, you need something like 35,000 youngsters at primary school in order to get 500 out. So that's the kind of statistics that we're currently grappling with. And then you say, now, how are we going to bring that about? And it's very interesting that for males, it's not too bad, there is a natural interest, but for females, the interest in the natural world, the physical world around them, seems to be knocked out of them quite early on in primary school. And that, if we think about Maori, Pacifica, apart from women, then we've got this huge failure, this huge untapped resource that as a country we're not developing. And so that's one of the themes that we're trying to get to grips with. How can we develop young women, Maori, Pacifica, to undertake more of those science, technology, engineering, mathematics degrees? And there are many OECD reports, and many will have seen the OECD reports that are here today, that New Zealand is lagging far behind in the way in which we're encouraging young people to take up technical kinds of careers. And as a nation, we're not performing all that well against other OECD countries. Particularly, although Singapore, for example, is not a member of the OECD, we're way behind the likes of Singapore in growing our capability. So I wanted to point out that the journey from that group study exchange team through to later on becoming involved with these government programs, and then more recently to have the privilege of being Chancellor at Victoria. And many will know here, of course, I don't have to tell you, it's one of the finest universities in Australia and New Zealand. And it's good to hear of Evan, who is going to do his doctorate next week. Was it, Evan, starting next week? Oh, today. Okay, that's a fantastic thing to do your doctorate there. I wanted also to acknowledge today the help, the assistance, the initiative that Wellington Rotary Club has taken in founding the Sir Paul Callaghan Eureka Trust. And I know very well the work that Francis has put in, John has put in. That's an amazing trust, and once again, if you go back and think of what's happened to myself, I would like to hear, if I'm still around, an Evan talk about what this has meant to him. I think that would be a very interesting parallel. So I'd like to bring together those two themes. One, to recognise the Rotary Foundation and what that's meant for one individual, and then how one individual has been able to feed back into or leverage that experience into quite a lot of benefit for the economy of the country. And I'd like to acknowledge also the help that this club has given to the Sir Paul Callaghan Foundation. And so that would bring me back now to some questions, and so you can see that I'm all about engineers, they're all about scientists, mathematics, engineering, technologists, are all about creating that which has never been. So, questions? I think we've picked up the points, but we haven't really paid a lot of attention to them. One sequel, I'll call it almost a sequel to that book, is called Get Off the Grass, which is an interesting title. And in that book, Sir Paul and his co-author, Sean Hendy, who some people here will know, have shown the distinction between Denmark and New Zealand. Denmark of roughly 30 years ago had an agricultural base and exporting base very, very similar to New Zealand. Denmark has drawn way ahead of New Zealand in their overall exporting performance and on many, many of the OECD indicators. Now, of course, that's not a comprehensive set of indicators. There are other things that really matter too. But, so to answer your question, Tony, I think we've taken notice, but kind of that's about all so far. I wouldn't say it is at the expense, but I think we are getting out of balance. A lot of particularly younger people are seeing the rise of app software, and these companies can take off, do really well for about 5 years, and then they disappear without trace. So it's a bit like the seed on stony ground. It can flourish, but then it dies. Where with more enduring companies based on producing products and maybe more embedded software is a much better way to succeed and create enduring companies. I think that would be my theme. We're not really creating enduring companies. Yeah, I'm very conscious of Kerry here. So, you know, there's one thing that really gripes me, and this is, I'm glad you asked that question. You know, here in New Wellington, we have the university, which has got over 20,000 students, 2,500 staff, And campuses near the railway station, Kilburn, of course, the design school, and maybe something coming up around the town hall, and the design school is down by Gusney Street. And that institution, after government, is the largest economic entity in Wellington. So the direct cash input into the city and to the region is roughly about $700 million per year, year after year after year. I don't find that talked about or exploited. So one of my missions is to answer that question, is to use that great rich treasure that we have there in order to improve the Wellington economy, because I think it's a bit out of balance right now. I don't know why it happens, but I think some of it has to do with the training of teachers. And in my personal view is we don't value teachers enough. And I think somewhere it's got to start back at teacher training and to value them more, certainly higher salaries, to get the very, very best teachers that we can in that critical level, which is the later years of primary school. But I don't know why young women are getting turned off. I wish I did, because then we could write our report. And Russ, you've been involved for a number of years in that. I think my response to that would be all of those critical thinking skills are extremely important. And I remember in IBM in Australia, the head programmer his degree was a Bachelor of Divinity. So those kind of skills brought him to the top of the top level of programming. One of the things, though, that I think we've got to be careful of, and I'm not decrying humanities here because they're extremely important and the team building skills, but it's really hard if you get someone who's graduated in a humanities subject to tell them about differential calculus or other kinds of technical skills. It's really hard to pick them up. So I would say you actually need both, but I'd like to emphasise those STEM skills. Apart from all the critical thinking. I've employed a lot of social scientists and they're extremely good and great at building teams. In the end, you do need some hard knowledge, some domain knowledge of those STEM subjects.